If you want to make money on Roblox, you need to sell developer products. But as a developer, scripting them can be a nightmare. There are legal issues when you charge players money for a product, and as a beginner scripter, this can be scary. But that's where ProfileStore comes in. It's an easy-to-use, open-source DataStore module that takes care of the hard parts for you. ProfileStore is my go-to recommended DataStore solution. If you follow along to the end of this video, you'll create a robust system that'll let you earn real money on Roblox. The best part is, you can reuse this system in all of your games in the future. We'll make sure you do everything legally and easily, so you can forget about the worries and just get back to making games and money. And before we begin, this is a part 2 of my ProfileStore tutorial series. In part 1, we just set up ProfileStore to store in-game data really easily and learned a modular approach to data management. We will be building directly off the scripts from the first video, so if you haven't seen it, pause this video, click the link in the description, and watch that first. Finally, this is an advanced scripting tutorial. If you're struggling with the scripts or running into errors, please join my Discord server, which is linked in the description. We've got a friendly community of scripters from beginner all the way to pro, and we'd love to help you solve your problems there. Let's get started by taking a look at Roblox's official documentation for developer products. A developer product differs from a game pass in that users can purchase them more than once, meaning it's useful for microcurrency transactions and repeatable objects or purchases. Creating developer products is pretty easy, but the hard part is how to sell and handle them. Because they're tied to one-time and often very repeatable transactions, Roblox has some systems set up with the marketplace service to ensure that players are actually getting what they're paying for. The responsibility to handle and record the transaction's completion falls on you as the developer, using the ProcessReceipt Callback of marketplace service. And the reason this is so important is that as a game, if you sell players a product without actually giving them something in return for their Robux, you are scamming them. But this doesn't need to worry you. Using ProfileStore, we can take care of the problems that you would otherwise have with returning and processing receipts for developer products really easily. Today, we're going to be creating a modular system so that you can easily add multiple different kinds of developer products and safely and securely store all of the transactions, as well as verifying that players get access to the products they've paid for, and will take care of all of the legal backend of the marketplace service. So I've opened back up into the project we created in the last ProfileStore tutorial, and as a quick refresher, we have a data init script, which sets up profiles for each player. We have a template script, which is going to store the data that the player currently has, and we have a data manager, which we can use to easily and modularly mutate players' data and have it automatically save to the profile. We also have in the Explorer ProfileStore saved in ServerScript service under libraries. The first thing we need to do to start working on selling developer products is actually create some. So I'm going to come to the Creator Hub here and click on the ProfileStore tutorial experience. And in here, we're going to make a couple of developer products to use as examples for selling them. The way to create developer products is once you're in the experience, scroll down to monetization on the left-hand side, click on developer products, and then right here, we'll just create a new developer product. The first one, we are just going to say buy 100 gold. We can leave the description blank, and let's charge 100 Robux for this product. And just for the sake of repetition, we'll make one more here called buy 50 gems, and we'll set this one to maybe 200 Robux because gems could be worth more than gold. Now that we have both of these developer products created for our experience, it's that easy. We're going to go back to Roblox Studio. Inside of Roblox Studio, just like in the last tutorial where we created a data manager module in ServerScript service, we are going to click on the data folder and add a new module script. We'll rename this module script to ProductManager, and it's going to handle everything in the game related to buying and selling developer products. Real quick, I'm going to rename the module variable to ProductManager so that we know what script we're in. And right off the bat, we're going to get access to a couple of services that we're going to need throughout this module. I'll create a services tab, and then the first service we need is, of course, the marketplace service. This is the service that handles buying and selling developer products, as well as contains the callback receipt that we need to use to verify to Roblox's backend that we've completed and logged the receipt of the purchase. We'll also get the players service, game get service players, as well as replicated storage, which will be used for triggering the purchase of a developer product, and server script service. This is how we get access to the other modules and scripts inside of our game. I'll create a references tab here. Under the references tab, we're going to get a reference to the data manager because of course this stores the profiles of each player in the game. So we can require server script service.data.data manager, which we created again in the last tutorial. And then at this point, we're going to come back over to the Explorer and create another module script underneath the product manager. So we'll add another module script and we are going to rename this to products. The products module script is going to return a list of functions for each product that we've created, and the function will actually just award the player with the product that they've purchased. So we can delete all of this and say return and then open up a table. In this table that we return, the format we want to use is we want to have a key of the developer product ID, and then the key is going to equal to a function which awards the product. So we'll open up our first key and we want to paste in the number of the developer product ID, which we can get from the Creator Hub website. For buy 100 gold, you click on the three dots, copy asset ID, and then in Studio, you just Control V, paste it right in. And I'm also going to leave a comment to let me know which ID this is for, buy 100 gold. Now this asset ID is going to equal a function and we'll fill the rest of this out later. For now, we are going to add the buy 50 gems one as well, copying the asset ID for the product, pasting it in as the key, and then adding in a function. Now we'll go back to the product manager, and here we're going to require the product function module that we just created. We'll say local product functions equals require script.products. Later on, we will access and call those functions from this manager module. Now, the first step of the developer product system is, of course, buying a developer product. So we're going to create a new function in the product manager called function ProductManager.product purchase requested. And into this function, we'll pass in the player that's requesting it, as well as the product ID that they're requesting to buy. Within this function, we are going to perform a sanity check on the product ID to make sure that it has been defined in our product functions module. So we can say if product functions of product ID equals nil, then it doesn't exist. So we're going to send out a quick warning to let us know that we need to go define it. No product function for product ID, and then we'll add in a comma and just say what the product ID is, as well as I'm going to add a tab here that says the player here, so that if it happens in a live game, we can actually know which player tried to buy a product that didn't exist. And then underneath this warning, we'll return so that the function doesn't complete and cause an error. And once we know that the product function exists, we are just going to prompt a purchase. This is where we're going to use marketplace service and use the member function prompt product purchase down here, and we'll just give it the player and the product ID. This function we've created is going to be how we request to buy any product for any player. But since this is on the server side, we're also going to really quickly set up a way for the players on the client side to send a message to the server to request the product. To do this, I'm going to create a quick screen GUI. If you're following along to put this system into your own game, you don't need to do this exact setup. Instead, what you can do is just integrate this system with your existing shop setup. But for now, I'm going to create a couple of text buttons. One is going to be called buy 100 gold. And again, you don't need to follow along with this necessarily, but I'm just going to position this down the side here so that for testing purposes, we can come in and actually activate our buttons. I'm also going to set the text of this button to buy 100 gold so we know which product it is, and I'll enlarge it just a little bit, and then I'll duplicate this, rename it to buy 50 gems, and move it down a little bit on the screen, as well as changing the text again so we know which product we're trying to purchase. And then I'll create a local script inside of this screen GUI, and this is just going to be buttons test. Again, for your own game, you can integrate this system with your own existing shop, or you can follow along with this tutorial and exactly what I'm doing here. Either way works. So I'll get replicated storage, and then within replicated storage, I'm going to create two new remote events. The first one I will call request 100 gold product, and then I'll duplicate this and rename the duplicated event to request 50 gems product. From within this script, I'll just grab the GUI by saying script.parent equals the GUI, and then whenever either button is pressed, by just saying GUI.buy 100 gold dot mouse button one click. I'm going to connect it to a function that very simply fires replicated storage dot request 100 gold product and fires the server. For the gems product, I'll do exactly the same thing. Buy 50 gems dot mouse button one click, connect it to a new anonymous function, and then say replicated storage dot request 50 gems product, fire server. On the client side, this is all we're going to do for right now. You can get really complicated with your shop setups, as we've seen in some of my past videos, and get really nice with your UI. For today, we'll just leave this as is for the client. Coming back to the product manager, we just need to add a couple of listeners to those remote events to fire the product purchase requested whenever a player clicks one of those buttons. That's going to be as easy as saying replicated storage dot request 100 gold product dot on server event, and then connect it to a new function. That function will give us the player which fired the event. And then within here, we'll say ProductManager.product purchase requested, give that function the player, and then we'll come into this products module we created earlier and make sure we copy the ID here and paste it in so we feed it the ID of the 100 gold product purchase. I'll just replicate this setup really quickly for the gems product. And one thing to note here is that I'm not allowing the client to send over which product ID they want to purchase. That's why I'm using two separate remote events here, or in another case, you could have them send over a string with the name of the product. But the reason that is because you actually do not want to trust the client with the ability to tell you which product ID they're going to purchase. In case you're doing a limited UGC or another drop of that kind, the client can sometimes fire through a product that they don't have access to. And in previous games in the past, that has been a problem where players have cheated systems. Basically, you just don't want to rely on them for this ID. You want to have it only set on the server. Now we're going to test this setup really quick just to make sure we can buy it. But before we do, Product Manager, the module, has not been required anywhere yet. With any module, you need to require it somewhere else in order for it to run. Come back into our data init script, and right underneath Data Manager, we'll just get a reference to the Product Manager by saying Product Manager equals require server script service .data.product manager. This will make sure the script runs and initializes and that we can actually listen to these events. Now I'll press play, and if we click on these buttons, we can verify that the item purchase pops up, buy 100 gold, or buy 50 gems. If we cancel out of this one, buy 50 gems. But we have another problem here. If we click the purchase button, it succeeds, but we don't get any gems. Roblox is going to give us problems because we're not returning to them that the receipt for the purchase has been processed, and we're not verifying that the player has actually gotten their 50 gems. And this is where the part of developer products comes into play, which can sometimes be kind of scary for new players because there's a lot going on. To explain what I'm talking about, I'm heading back to the Creator Hub docs and scrolling down to the ProcessReceipt Callback member of the Marketplace service. ProcessReceipt is a one-step catch-all callback which you are required to use to process any purchased developer product in your game. It is also the recommended way to actually give players the product that they've just purchased, which is a little bit different from game passes or other objects. Inside of the ProcessReceipt Callback, we can take a look at what this actually returns to you after a player completes a purchase. This callback will get fired and you will receive the following dictionary of receipt info data. You'll receive the unique purchase ID that the player just made, the player's user ID, the product ID of the product that they have purchased, what place you're in when you purchased it, as well as how much money they spent and the fact that they spent in Robux. When you're listening to this callback, you are required to return this enum, a product purchase decision of either purchase granted or purchase not processed yet. This is how Roblox knows you as the developer have actually given the player their reward and that you're not scamming them. Now, obviously, as you can see from how much information there is here, there is a lot to take into consideration with the ProcessReceipt callback. Sometimes users can complete a transaction and then get kicked or crashed or disconnected from your game before the product is awarded to them. In that case, it's considered your fault if the product doesn't end up in the player's inventory, even if that happens. So there are basically a lot of edge cases to worry about of players getting disconnected, of internal server errors, maybe with the DataStore, and you don't save the fact that the player got their new product. Sometimes ProcessReceipt can get called on two servers at the same time. However, with session locking and ProfileStore from the last tutorial, this is not really a concern. Sometimes internal Roblox servers are down, meaning that your returned product decision doesn't even get recorded, even if it did work, meaning that in the back end, the purchase remains unresolved. And that's something we also have to take care of. And finally, there's a rare error that does still occur where you can grant a player their product, but all of the DataStore calls are down. So Roblox might think you've granted them their product, while in reality, it hasn't been saved to their DataStore because of an internal error. The main way we can take advantage of the process receipt function and ProfileStore working together to solve all of these problems is because of the fact that the process receipt callback can yield forever as long as the server is alive. We don't have to immediately tell Roblox that a purchase was processed or not. This is extremely useful because we can wait until we've verified that a product has successfully been logged in the profile of the player. Back in the product manager, let's set up something that connects the process receipt callback into a function that accesses ProfileStore. We can say marketplace service.processReceipt, and instead of calling this like a function or connecting this like it's an event, it's a callback, so it's a little bit different. What we need to do is create a local function, and we'll just call this processReceipt, and then we will set this value equals to processReceipt, but don't put parentheses on the end because we're not calling this function, we're just providing marketplace service with a reference to this function for this specific experience. I'm adding a comment for clarity here. We'll add in a lot of comments throughout the rest of this tutorial just to help you be able to understand it as we're going back through it all. So we'll say marketplace service callback to verify product has been granted. Process receipt gives us a dictionary, which is the receipt info of the product. And the first thing we want to do when we process the receipt of a product is make sure that the player is still in the game, because sometimes players can leave the game right after they have purchased a product. Now, if this happens, one key feature of the callback process receipt that I don't know if I've mentioned yet is that it will fire multiple times every time a player joins a game until you return the enum of product purchase decision. And again, that's either not processed yet or purchase granted, meaning that if this fails, that's okay, because when the player rejoins, we can run through this function as many times as it takes until it's successfully saved to the profile and the player has been granted their product. So that's why we're going to first add in here a sanity check on the player to say if the player is not equal to nil, then we'll continue. Make sure player is in game. So if the player is in game, we'll add that in right here. But if they're not, outside of that if check, we are going to return enum.productPurchaseDecision.not processed yet. And at all branching code paths that we're going to set up, at some point we need to have a return and return this enum as either not processed yet or as purchase granted. In this case, it's not processed yet. The player is no longer in the game. Once we know the player exists, we can get a reference to the player's profile. We can say DataManager.profiles of player. And again, we're going to keep adding in some extra layers of security here because this is so important. We are going to wait for the profile to exist in case it has not been set up yet. This process receipt callback can get fired immediately when a player joins the game. So we'll say when profile equals nil and the parent of the player still equals the player's service, we are going to just wait one frame and then try to set the profile again. So DataManager.profiles of player. As soon as the profile exists or the player is no longer in the game, it will exit out of this while loop. And then at this point, we again want to make sure the profile exists, because if it doesn't, that means the player has left the game. And if the profile does exist, so if the profile is not equal to nil, then it's actually time to call the product function that we have defined here. And don't worry, again, we'll fill these in a little bit. So the same way we did right up here with the sanity check on the product ID, we're going to copy this and paste this right in here to make sure that the product function exists. However, instead of product ID, we can still get that by saying receipt info dot product ID. So once we have the product ID there, again, we'll print it off if it doesn't exist. And this will just let us know as we're testing that we need to set it up. And if it doesn't, we need to return, again, another branching code path here, product purchase decision dot not processed yet. If the function does exist, we are going to grant the product and return the result. All of this so far has been pretty standard setup for marketplace service, but now we're going to start using the profiles and ProfileStore a little bit more extensively. And as we do, we're going to go into why this is so useful for marketplace service and developer products as opposed to the normal Roblox or DataStore method. We're going to first off create another function right above here, above process receipt. So we'll say local function, and we will call this CheckPurchaseIdAsync async. This will be an asynchronous function because what this function is going to do is waits until the purchase ID that we give it has been stored in the profile before confirming product purchase decision. To get around the errors and the problems we've talked about earlier of players getting kicked or of the data store going down and not being able to save the product that you've given the player, we're going to use a feature of the ProfileStore called LastSavedData to verify that the product has been saved and is currently saved in the data store before we even give back to the marketplace service this product purchase decision. I'm going to add in a colon here and say that this function is going to return something of type enum.productPurchaseDecision so that we know exactly what it's for. And then back in the ProcessReceipt callback, we are going to get a new product purchase decision, which is going to be the same type as this enum, of course, but we are going to get one returned from that function. So CheckPurchaseIdAsync. And then after we have that, that's what we will return here. So we'll return product purchase decision right here. Again, that's going to be of this type. So what do we need to give the CheckPurchaseIdAsync function in order for it to grant the product and make sure that it's been saved into the data store? The parameters we need are the profile of the player in question. We are going to need the purchase ID of the transaction, and we are going to need a grant product function, which we'll call, and this is going to be one of the functions from our product function script we defined earlier. We'll pass it into here and it will call that once we know that the player is being granted the function. And when we call this, it will actually award the player with what they've just purchased. So in our ProcessReceipt Callback function, we'll pass in the parameters we need here. I'm going to press enter so that it spaces them out and it's a little bit easier to read. We'll pass in the profile that we've already accessed. We'll pass in receiptinfo.purchaseID, which is the unique ID of the transaction. And we'll create a new function here. And then inside this function, since we know the product function already exists, which we've checked that it does here, we will copy that, paste it here. And instead of referencing it, we are going to call it just by putting parentheses on the end there. And since we are calling the product function here, or rather we are creating a function that when this function is called, it will call this product function. We need to know what we need to give our product functions as well in order for them to execute properly. To do that, the first thing we want to do is give them all of the receipt info from the transaction. We'll also, of course, give it the player that we're accessing and that player's profile. Now I'm going to drag over all of these, copy them, click into our product function module, and paste in all of those parameters in each of these functions. Each one of your product functions should ask for a parameter for receipt info, the player they're modifying, as well as that player's profile. No matter what your developer product is trying to do, you're going to have access to all of the data you could possibly need to make it work. Now, in the case of the buy 100 gold function, if you remember from the last tutorial, we actually have one set up in the data manager that can add gold to a player. So all we're going to do in this product list is get a reference to the data manager. We can get that by saying local data manager equals require game get service server script service .data manager. Once we have the data manager, we can just put it inside this function and say data manager add gold, and then just give it the player and say 100 gold. That's all we need to do for this product function. That is it. This will be called as soon as we know that the player has successfully purchased that product. For the gems, it'll be very similar. We do data manager.add gems, and instead of 100 gems, we'll add 50 gems to the player. Again, using the add gems function that we created in the last tutorial, meaning it'll automatically set the leader stats of gold and gems, as well as fire through update gems in case we have a GUI on the client that is going to list out gems there. In both of these examples, we're not actually using receipt info, but you can remember that receipt info has a lot of data inside it. It has how much money the player has spent in case you want inside this function. Maybe you're logging how much total Robux a player has spent in your game. Or the other really useful thing is that receipt info contains the place ID that it was purchased in. So if you have multiple places in your game and each place, maybe the developer product does something different, you can filter by the place ID that you have here and then perform the correct action. For this example, we're set up on our product functions. So let's come back to our product manager. Our CheckPurchaseID asynchronous call is complete here. We just need to actually set up this function to return the enum.productPurchaseDecision that we defined it as returning earlier. So let's talk about what we we need this function to do specifically before we actually go ahead and set it up. I'm back here on the documentation for ProfileStore, looking at the profile object that each player has. Within that object, as you know from the last tutorial, there is a profile.data table, which contains the same information from the template that we've set up. This is the data that is currently being accessed and modified in your game. The profile also has a .LastSavedData table attached to it. This is a read-only table. This is not one that you can or should try to modify, but this is going to be the last version of profile.data that has been successfully stored to the DataStore. But this is, again, extremely useful because we can use it to verify particular pieces of data that have guaranteed been saved to the DataStore. And hey, just like it says here, securely handling developer product purchases. If we create a log within data of the product purchases that have already been handled, then we can compare our current data to the last saved data to verify that our current, again, unique purchase ID from the transaction has been saved or not. And from there, we can either grant the product to the player, or we can return again to marketplace service, hey, this has already been granted, we're all good to go. And guys, if that went in one ear and out the other, don't worry about it. We're gonna set it up here so you can follow along, and hopefully it'll make more sense as we go. We're trying to be secure here, so we're gonna really quickly check if the profile is active. A profile would be inactive if the player has been kicked from the game or their profile has been loaded in another game. And we can check that just by saying if profile is active, this will return true or false. If it's true, then we want to go forward there. But just like on our process receipt, we need every branching path of this function to return that enum. So if it's not true, we will return enum.productPurchaseDecision.not processed yet. If the profile is active, here's where we're going to compare the transaction purchase ID to the last saved purchase IDs. So the first thing we'll do is get the cache of previous purchase IDs. This will be what we actually compare against. So we'll say local purchase ID cache equals profile.data.purchase ID cache. Now you might be wondering right now, hang on, we haven't defined purchase ID cache in our template in the last video or in this one, and that's okay. We don't actually need to put it in there. What we can do right here is say, if there isn't a purchase ID cache because it hasn't been defined, then we'll just create one. We'll say purchase ID cache equals a new table, and then set profile.data.purchase ID cache to that new blank table. And even though it's not in the template, this means from now on, the profile will have this ID cache in it. Once we have this cache set up in the profile, we will grant the product if it hasn't been previously logged. So the way we'll check that is by saying if table.find purchase ID cache as the table we're looking for the specific purchase ID. If this equals nil, then it hasn't been logged, so we actually want to grant the product. We're going to use a p call to do this just for some extra security. So we'll say local success and result. Pcalls return two variables equals pcall grant product function. We don't need to give this any parameters because as we've set it up down here in our process receipt callback, we've already given it the parameters. We're just calling this function, which calls this function. Now we'll check if the pcall failed. If success is false, then we will warn failed to grant product. This could be for any number of reasons, but in any case, we want to know about it. We're going to return the key of the profile. So this will be from the last video. We had set the keys here to be player underscore and the player's user ID. And we'll also print off the purchase ID, the unique ID of this, as well as the result. This will be an error message that came from our product function, in which case it'll print this off and we'll know that, hey, somewhere in here, something is erroring out. And then we can use that data in the output to go find the problem. Of course, if it does fail, again, every branching code path here needs to return enum.productPurchaseDecision, and in this case, it will be not processed yet because it failed. If the p call succeeded, then what we're going to do is add in the purchase ID to our purchase ID cache so that in the future, we know that this purchase ID has been handled, because sometimes the marketplace service will try to process the receipt multiple times, even after we've already successfully granted the product. What we're going to do is if pcall succeeded, let me add in a parenthesis here, log purchase ID to cache. Now we don't want to waste a ton of data here in the cache, and the cache doesn't need to be so long because after a while, no matter what, marketplace service is not going to try calling all of these functions anymore. So we don't need to hang on to this purchase ID in this cache forever. We're going to set a max cache size here. So let's create a limit. We'll capitalize all of it because it's a constant value. We'll say max cache size equals 100. So at max, we're going to store 100 product purchase IDs in our cache. If a player is purchasing more than 100 products in a short amount of time, first of all, congratulations, because holy moly, your game is probably making you a ton of Robux. But second of all, we don't care about all of those. Marketplace service is not going to have problems with more than 100 in a row. So as part of this, we are going to remove outdated purchase IDs. We can do that by saying while hashtag purchase ID cache, or the number of entries it has, is greater than or equal to our max cache size constant. What we just want to do is table.remove, and then remove from that table the index of 1. That'll be the oldest one in the table. And then after we've done that, we'll do table.insert to the purchase ID cache and give it the purchase ID of this specific transaction. This appends it to the end of the table. So at this point, we don't need to return something yet, because the next thing we need to do, verify that the product has been logged in the data store. So here's where we're going to be using Profile's last saved data table to check if the purchase ID has been successfully saved into our cache. We're going to do this in multiple times and places. So we're going to create a function that's going to handle this quick check. We'll just say is purchase saved. And all this is going to do is get the saved cache. So the cache that's been confirmed to be saved to the data store by saying profile.lastSavedData.purchaseID cache, and then we will return either true or false. This is going to be a Boolean. So we need to return if the saved cache is not nil, then we want to check and see if this purchase ID is found within the saved cache. So that's where we'll say table.find saved cache and check if the purchased ID is in that saved cache. Now this will return the index of the purchase ID in the cache if it's there. So instead of returning the index, we need to return true or false. So in this case, we're going to say not equal to nil. So if this returns something that's not nil, then it will return true. If the purchase ID is not in the saved cache, it will return false, and then we'll know if it's been saved. However, we need an else statement here, because if the saved cache here is nil, that means it hasn't been saved, or last saved data is actually blank on the purchase ID cache section. So we'll just return false. It'll be that simple. So right here, we're going to perform an initial purchase ID saved check. Now remember, before we go on here, this is an asynchronous function, meaning if the purchase hasn't yet been saved to the data store, what we are going to do is wait until it has been before returning our decision at this point. So we'll check initially to see if it's been saved. We'll say if is purchase saved equals true, then we can return an enum. Again, all code paths need to return this enum.productPurchaseDecision.purchaseGranted. This is actually the first time so far we've confirmed to Roblox that the purchase has been granted. And this case will normally be true if you've already gone through all of this, granted the product, and saved it to the data store, but for some reason Marketplace Service is calling the ProcessReceipt Callback multiple times. So this is handling that edge case. However, if is purchase saved equals false because it has not yet been saved to the data store, then what we're going to do is periodically check if the purchase ID is saved until it is, or the profile's session ends. Earlier in this function, we checked and made sure the session is active, but now we are going to be doing some waiting. So each time we wait, we need to make sure that the session is still active so that the player hasn't left or been signed out, because this is just going to be a loop that keeps running until it returns true. And that loop we're going to define by saying while profile is active equals true do. So as long as the profile is active, it'll keep running this loop. And within this loop, we're going to do a couple of things here. We are going to first get a copy of the current last saved data table. So we'll say local last saved data copy equals profile.lastSavedData. And then what we're going to do, manually save the profile. If you have your profile, you can manually call profile save just like that, and it will trigger an update to the data store to save all of the profile's data. You don't want to do this very often because ProfileStore is configured to automatically reduce as many of those API calls as possible. But in this case, we want it to because it's just going to be one time. Then what we're going to do is wait until the profile has been saved. The API call that save performs is an asynchronous call as well, so sometimes it can take a moment for it to complete, and we can do a pretty simple check here to make sure that it's been saved successfully. We can say if profile.lastSavedData, which should be different than this data copy now because we've manually saved it. If the last saved data equals the copy, that means they're the same, and that also means that the profile has not yet been successfully saved to the data store. So in that case, the profile object has an event we can wait for. We can say profile.on after save. This event will get fired as soon as the profile has finished successfully saving to the data store. Wait. So this will wait until LastSavedData, which is a copy of what the data store on Roblox's backend currently has saved, is not equal to the previous version of it. We know the profile's been successfully saved. And then we're going to perform another check because sometimes things can go wrong. We'll check if purchase ID has been saved. So this is where we've created this function earlier. Let's copy that now. And we can say if is purchase saved equals true, then it's been saved. So we return enum product purchase decision purchase granted. And at this point, return breaks out of this loop. It breaks out of the entire function here, and it will return this value all the way back down to here in our ProcessReceipt Callback function. It spits it out to here, and then it returns it. And when this returns, it goes all the way back to the marketplace service. At this point, we have logged the transaction as completed, but we're not quite done with this loop up here. So let's go back up and finish one more thing, because this can equal false. And if that does equal false, we're going to wait a period of time and try again until we get it to work correctly. So we can just say if profile is active equals true, then we're just going to wait like 10 seconds and then run this loop again. It's going to manually save it again. It's going to check and wait for it to save successfully and make sure it's been logged. This loop will keep running as long as the player is still in the game, the profile is still active, and it's going to keep going until it guarantees that it's saved your purchase ID. Once it has, then it will finally return to marketplace service that the purchase has been granted. And this setup will solve all of the problems you've had with developer products in the past. Or if you're brand new to developer products and making Robux, this will make sure you don't have any problems going forward, which is ideal. You can set this up, you can forget about it, and you cannot have to worry about accidentally scamming someone, because nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to get the email from Roblox that players are disputing transactions made in their game. It's not fun. So this solves it. Let's give this a test, because that was a lot of scripting and not much testing going on. All right, so let's hit buy 100 gold. The test purchase prompt pops up. Let's buy it. And you can see there, gold jumped from 515 to 615. Let's do buy 50 gems as well. This should increment gems by 50. And it did. That's perfect. Okay, no warnings either in the output, so we know things are good to go. Guys, this is working great. This is going to solve all of the edge cases, all of the problems we've talked about from the beginning of the video, and it's working just great. But before we finish off here, let's just talk about how to add more products, just so that you can get a good idea of how to do it. So I have gold, gems. We set these up at the beginning. If I want to add in more products, it's pretty dang simple. All I need to do is, let's say, add 10 honor points. Again, last time we set up this honor value here. We can add another thing. We would then go to the Roblox creator page. That would be in the Roblox creator hub here. We can create a new developer product, name it, buy 10 honor, or whatever it is, ... set the price, and then we would copy the asset ID from it. Back in here, we paste the asset ID, whatever it is there, set up our new function. And inside this function, of course, we need to have these 3 variables set as parameters. And then we'd have DataManager, we would set it up there. And this would be your setup if you wanted to add more developer products like we don't have here. The actual scripting of them, what actually goes in this code section, is going to be up to you and what you want your specific new developer products to actually handle. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end of the video, please join my Discord server as well if you're having any problems. This was a complicated scripting video. There's a lot going on. We're using profiles, we're using events, we're using LastSavedData. We're doing a lot of asynchronous calls and a lot of P calls, a lot of protected things. And it's all to get these magical Robux filtering into your account just like that. So If you made it to the end, thank you so much. Please like the video. Please subscribe if you found this helpful. Make sure to go show Lolaris some love for creating this module. ProfileStore is amazing. The profile objects, they just make it no sweat to handle all of these issues. Whereas if you're using a basic data store, you would have to set all of these up by yourself. And unfortunately, a lot of people get that wrong. Lolaris has done it for you. I've also linked the documentation for ProfileStore down below. The documentation site is this page, which I've been showing off quite a bit. It's got the API, so you can see all of the methods in all of the different objects you have. You can see all of the properties. So if you're looking to do more with ProfileStore, you should head on over to there, check it out, and it might be able to help you solve some of your problems. But you can also join the Discord, and we can help you too. So yeah, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you all. Take care.